Hello Internet user, my name is Gary of Gary's Wares. I make wooden pipes out of exotic hardwoods. Do you like pain? Do you like painful projects that are full of mindless tedium where you have to take a piece and check it and stew it and just... If so, then this project's for you. I made 3 pipes a while back, and within 2 weeks of making them, I sold them, and they were such a pain to make. But I guess what that means is I'm going to have to make them again, but they're such a pain to make. What it involves is making a miniature laminate out of 1x1 pieces, and then taking those pieces and turning them into stem segments and shaping them, and it's going to be painful. If you're into pain, or if you're into watching me be in pain, then this is the video for you. I guess I better get started. Some people refer to me as an artist, but I think of myself more as a craftsman. To me, a craft is something that has distinct, repeatable steps. Drill a hole this wide, this deep, this many inches from the sides, that sort of thing. I think art is more about the choices that you make, and I think the one chance that I have to really be artistic is in my choice of wood. So when picking a laminate, you want to pick woods that complement each other. From experience, I know that Kingwood goes very well with Ebony, and I also know that Kingwood goes very well with Tulipwood. And so I think this will work out pretty well. Something else to consider when you're picking out wood is abnormalities in dimensions. These sticks come one by one, and sometimes they're a little bit larger, like this one is. And to do laminates, you want to start with pieces that are as wide as you possibly can. Here's how it works. I'm going to cut out pieces of equal width. Then I'm going to take all the pieces and mix them up, glue them together like this. Then I'm going to cut them along like this and glue them so that they make a little checkerboard. After that, I'm going to take the laminate and cut it into 4 different pieces. And those pieces are going to be made into stag segments for the pipe. Then they're glued in a specific way, and specific lines are drawn. And I've actually covered this in another video of mine called how to make a twisted pipe. But the end product is going to look a bit like this. This is a candle holder that I made, and it's going to have this sort of twist on the stem. Now, even as outrageous as it may sound, even if you start off with a piece of stock that's 1 inch and 1/8 wide, after sanding and surfacing, you may end up with a piece that's only 3/16 of an inch wide. And if you've got 4 pieces like that, that means that your resulting laminate is only 3/4 of an inch wide. That's a lot to lose considering what you started out with. I think the best way to do this is with a scroll saw. Since the kerf is so thin, you're going to lose a lot less, and you want to lose as little as possible when dealing with this kind of thing. First, I'm going to cut off pieces that are 2 1/4 inch long. The pieces have been cut and the paint has already begun. My original piece of ebony was that piece that was a little bit bigger than the rest of them. Well, I took a look at it, and it's going to take some shaping before it's even ready to be cut. And actually, after squaring it, it's only going to be 1x1 anyway. So I just went with the regular size stock. Something else to look out for is this. They giveth and they taketh away. And if you're going to do a laminate, you've got to look out for things like this. So it's worth sanding the top to make clean lines, especially on the ebony, because that's hard to see. Now the pain truly begins. The pieces have been cut, and that went pretty well, actually. When you're doing this is the kind of thing that when you make one mistake, you pay for it twice. Now, what I did last time is take these pieces over to my oscillating spindle sander to that edging attachment, but that thing is powerful and aggressive, and I don't want to lose too much stock. So I'm going to do this by hand. One of the concerns when you're sanding these pieces is when you get to the edge, the tendency is to put a lot of pressure on the very edge of the piece. And when you're making a laminate, that's a big space for glue to go, and glue is ugly and you don't want that. This is my new pipe. I made it recently. If you're interested in how it was made, I also made a video on that called Gary Makes a Jumbo Car Pipe. I had an issue like this with the edge, and it's sort of filling in with glue on this one. And on the inside, it's flush and it's perfectly fine, but just right there on the edge. See how gross that is? There's the one spot where it came off how I wanted it to. And for this to happen, the edge has to be perfectly flat. So after talking to my dad about the best way to go about doing this, he suggested using a card scraper, which I didn't even know we had. And this is a new tool for me, so this will be interesting to use, but I found it's very helpful in showing you where you need to sand. When you're planing a piece with a sander, you don't want to sand necessarily every part, because maybe one part is right on, and then you sand that, and it's more work for you. So when you use a scraper on these pieces, it gets the flat parts shiny, and it shows you where you need to pay more attention. Now this apparently is the best piece. See all the shiny spots on it? That's what you're looking for. Some of the pieces came out like this, where the only shiny parts on them are on the end. And what that means is this is sort of like a valley, but it's really hard to tell. One thing that'll save you some time is you don't have to bother with shaping the outside of the stock. These will be smoothed out once the laminate's put together, and you can do this so long as you put these pieces on the outside of each of the laminates. So now, I got some work to do. And I'm finished. It only took me 3.5 hours. Yeah, 3.5 hours. But they came out pretty well, pretty smooth, pretty shiny overall. You'll notice there's some spots that aren't shiny. It's been my experience that they don't need to be this smooth, but I've been at this for 3.5 hours, and I say they're good. Now to mix them up and glue them together. The glue's dried and they came out pretty well. Lost about a 1/16 of an inch here, about an 1/8 there. This one though, I didn't pay very close attention to lining it up when I glued it, which means I'm going to lose about a 1/16 of an inch. So now to square it on the oscillating spindle sander. The laminates have been squared. Squaring's important because these are going to be divided into 4 equal pieces. If the sides aren't square, you're going to end up with wedges, which is workable, but not what we're shooting for. One thing to watch out for is on pieces like Tulipwood that have really strong grain patterns, it can really mess with your head with the straight lines just being a little bit off. So when you make your marks, be careful. So now to repeat step 2. The pieces have been cut, and if you made it past the scroll saw twice, then the really stressful part's over. So these came out pretty well. This one was probably the best one. And so now to plane the pieces. The tiles have been planed, and this time it only took me 1.5 hours because I got wise and used the belt sander. I didn't use it before because the belt sander has no problem turning this into sawdust. However, with a card scraper, it makes it a lot easier. If you want to use a belt sander, make yourself one of these, and I suppose this is properly called a jig, and get the tiles, put them in there, and put this up against the belt sander, and you can control the piece like that. Just put it up there and kiss it just a little bit, just to get it, just. Then use a card scraper to make sure it's level enough to hand sand. Now the tiles get glued again. The laminate's been glued, and they all came out over 3/4 of an inch. That one was really close. So let's square it and see what they really look like. Here they are squared, and I'm pretty happy with the result. This one has some glue spots, but the very outside of the stock is going to be shaped, so that's not that big of a problem. And besides, these can be hidden on the bottom if they need to be. Now to cut the stock into stem segments. The laminates have been cut into stem segments, and they've also been squared. One way to tell if your pieces are squared is how stackable they are. If it feels like you're playing a game of Jenga, it's time to re-square some of the pieces. I've also cut and squared 3 pieces of ebony for the bowls. These are 1x1 pieces that are cut to 1 1/8 inch long. I also drew 1-inch circles on the blanks and marked the center. So the next step is drilling. Many holes of various sizes have been drilled. For the bowls, I drilled a pilot hole with an 1/8 inch brad point bit down to about 13/16 of an inch, which is right between 3/4 and 7/8 of an inch. Then, with this 1/2 inch core box bit, I drilled down to that depth. Then I marked the depth on the side and started drilling a hole with the 1/8 inch brad point bit, but finished with the regular bit. The reason that you do this is the brad point bit is very destructive on the end, but the regular bit has a more forgiving tip that's less disruptive to the airflow of the bowl. I'm breezing over the finer points of this because this is stuff I've already covered in another video on my channel called The Basics of Pipe Making. After drilling the bowls, I drilled a hole in the middle of the stem segments with a 9/64 inch brad point bit. That's important because I'm going to use an 1/8 inch rod to line up the stem segments, and I want to make sure that they don't get caught on the rod. When you're drilling the stem segments, you want to make sure that you use a bit that has a brad point bit. Regular bits don't immediately take away material, and they can act sort of like a wedge, which is not something you want with these laminates. Sometimes when you're drilling the stem segments, the laminates will come apart on you like this one did. That's okay, that's fixable. All you have to do is lightly sand the areas where they make contact and re-glue it, and it should come out all right. To get the proper shape of the twist on the stem, you have to glue the stem segments so that the corners overlap, so that they're sort of staggered like this. And then what you do is you're going to draw a line from the middle of the edge of one to where that intersects with the next block above it, and from there to the middle of the edge of the next one, and so on and so forth, and it makes a natural twist which we'll shape later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the rod into the air passage of the bowl. Then I'm going to take a stem segment, put some glue on it, slide it down, and line it up like that. Take the next piece, put glue on it, slide down the thing, and line it up so the pieces are staggered like this. Once I got the pieces glued like that, I'm going to take the rod out and clamp them in this direction. But before I do that, I'm going to use a hand sander to give them one last servicing, and then they'll be ready to be glued. The glue is dry, and now they're officially pipes. Music to my ears. Now to draw the lines for shaping. The lines have been drawn. And you see how drawing these lines in this very specific way makes a spiral throughout the whole stem. Like I said before, you draw from the middle of the edge of one piece to where that intersects the next piece, and then from there to the middle of the edge of the next thing, and on and on and on and so forth. This twist shape is essentially a spiraling flute. I'm going to make the shape of the coarse sanding drum on a rotary tool, and it goes a little something like this. First thing you do is knock the corners going down one side. You don't have to get it all at once, just knock the peaks down. Then you go through and knock down the peaks on the other side. And you see how that'll leave a natural kind of groove? Well, that's what you take out next. Once you take out that middle ridge, it becomes pretty self-evident what else you have to do. Don't worry too much about shaping the mouthpiece or down by the bowl just yet. So now, to shape the other sides and the rest of the pipes. And the basic shaping is done. After shaping, you'll be left with peaks along the ridges. What you want to do is knock those down and then sort of sharpen the edge. After the peaks get knocked off, you'll be left with little things like this along the way. Now you sharpen the edge. One thing to watch out for when you're doing this are parts like right here, where the segments were glued together, and like right there. Make sure you knock those out when you clean up the edges. Now that that's done, I'm going to shape the mouthpiece. I'm going to take the rotary tool to this and shape around these 4 squares in the middle. Now that that's done, I'm going to use the shape of the twist to round over this. Now that that's done, I'm going to shape the stem side of the bowl. And that's done. Now to shape the outside of the bowl on the oscillating spindle sander. Now all that's left is a final sanding and some finish, and they'll look a little bit like this. I can honestly say that these 3 pipes are some of the best that I've ever made. They're very good, but they're not perfect. That glue line right there, for example, or where the stem meets the bowl. Scratches left from the rotary tool. Those are minor flaws, but when you're making things this small, your mistakes tend to stand out. Although, I have to admit, I didn't make many mistakes. Things like this are because of momentary lapses of attention to detail, where you're too tired or maybe you just don't see it. And when you put this much time into a project, it can really bum you out when you find any mistakes. Something to watch out for when you're working with ebony is sometimes there'll be naturally occurring little pinholes. One of the pipes in the last batch I made had a hole like this going through the wall of the bowl, which I thought looked really cool, but what if that hole went through the wall of the bowl toward the center? When you drill the ebony bowls, look for these little holes through the wall. If you find one, then don't use it in the pipe, or it won't be any good. You'll feel really dumb if you get this far and find that hole. These things took a long time to make, and within hours of posting a picture of these to social media, I sold one. It'll be just my luck the other two will sell, and I'll have to make these again. But that's it. That's all there is. So if you like what you've seen, subscribe to my channel and check me out on Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of thing. My name is Gary, and I'm out!